The first time the sheriff showed up at my ranch, the HOA president stood beside him with a confident smile, pointing at my fence and telling him I was the problem. She said I was blocking progress, damaging a community project, and stopping her son's luxury development. What she didn't know was that I wasn't trying to stop anyone. I was protecting the one thing my husband and I spent our entire lives building. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 53 years old, and I own a 60-acre cattle ranch in the Texas Hill Country. This ranch wasn't just land to me. It was the place where my husband Daniel and I built our life together. We bought it in 1997 when we had almost nothing except hard work and a dream. We fixed fences, raised cattle, planted trees, and slowly turned an empty piece of property into our home. Daniel always said land remembers everything. The storms you survive, the work you put in, and the promises you keep. When he passed away in 2022, the ranch became the last piece of him I still had. Every corner reminded me of the life we created together. I thought protecting this place would be the hardest thing I ever had to do. I was wrong. The real fight started when a luxury neighborhood called Red Oak Preserve was built next to my property. Their HOA president, Victoria Caldwell, was used to getting what she wanted. She was polished, confident, and carried herself like every decision she made was automatically the right one. Her son Ethan was the developer behind the project, and he wanted one thing from my ranch: more space. There was an old legal access road crossing the edge of my property. The agreement was simple. Neighbors could use a 12-foot dirt road to reach the highway. I never had a problem with that. I believed in being a good neighbor, but access didn't mean ownership, and it definitely didn't mean they could change my land whenever they wanted. One morning, I walked outside and saw construction equipment on my property. Workers were removing fence posts Dano and I had installed years earlier. They were widening the dirt road from 12 feet to 24 feet. Nobody called me. Nobody asked permission. They just decided my property was part of their development plan. I walked up to the construction supervisor and asked, "Who gave you permission to do this?" He barely looked at me and said, "Ethan Caldwell approved the expansion." That answer told me everything. They weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They simply believed my permission wasn't necessary. I went inside, pulled out the original easement documents, and read every line carefully. The agreement was clear: 12 feet, nothing more. That afternoon, I called Victoria. I expected an apology. Instead, she laughed. She told me I didn't understand development and that I was making things difficult for everyone. Then she offered to buy my ranch for $700,000. She called it generous. I knew it wasn't. The property was worth far more. The money wasn't the point. The point was that she looked at me and saw a widow who would probably give up rather than fight. She didn't see someone who had spent decades taking care of this land. She didn't see someone who had learned patience, resilience, and how to stand alone. The next morning, I bought industrial chain and steel posts. I didn't block the legal 12-foot access they had. I only closed the unauthorized expansion they created. I placed signs along the fence line: private easement, unauthorized expansion prohibited. As I stood there watching the sunrise over the ranch, I knew this wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about respect, and I had no idea that Victoria's next move would be the biggest mistake she ever made. The next morning started quietly, almost too quietly. I remember standing on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over the pasture, thinking maybe Evelyn would finally realize she had made a mistake. Maybe she would send someone over, apologize, and we could figure out a reasonable solution like neighbors were supposed to do. I wasn't looking for a fight. I never wanted a fight. After losing Daniel, the last thing I wanted was to spend my days arguing with people who didn't even know me. But some people see kindness as weakness, and Evelyn Hart had spent weeks proving she was one of those people. Around 10:30 that morning, I heard a vehicle coming down my driveway. I looked up and saw a sheriff's deputy pulling in. Right behind him was Evelyn in her luxury SUV, wearing sunglasses like she was arriving at a movie premiere instead of a property dispute. She stepped out before the deputy even opened his door. "That's her," she said immediately, pointing toward me. "She's the one damaging HOA property." I remember looking at the deputy's face because I wanted to see if he had already made up his mind. But he didn't. He simply looked at me and asked, "Ma'am, can you explain what's going on?" So I did. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I just handed him the paperwork. I gave him the original easement agreement, the property survey, and the document showing exactly where the legal access ended and where the unauthorized expansion began. The deputy stood there reading everything while Evelyn paced back and forth behind him. "This is ridiculous," she said. "This woman is trying to stop progress because she doesn't understand how communities work." The deputy didn't answer. He walked over to the road, measured the width, looked at the fence line, then came back holding the documents. Finally, he looked at Evelyn and said something that changed the entire mood at the gate. "Ma'am, based on what I'm seeing, the property owner has a right to protect the area that was altered outside the easement agreement." Evelyn stared at him like he had spoken another language. "Are you serious?" she said. "You're taking her side," the deputy calmly replied. "I'm not taking sides. I'm reading the paperwork." That sentence bothered her more than anything else because people like Evelyn are used to winning arguments through confidence, not facts. She wasn't used to someone ignoring her title, her influence, or her attitude. She looked back at me and said, "You really think you can stop a development project?" I looked at her and said, "No, Evelyn, I think you should have asked before you changed my property." For a moment, nobody said anything. The wind was moving through the trees. The cattle were grazing in the distance. And I remember thinking how strange it was that a simple sentence could make someone so angry. Because the truth was never complicated. They wanted something that wasn't theirs. I was simply saying no. Later that afternoon, I received an official letter from Blake Hart's attorney. It was a cease and desist notice. The kind of letter designed to intimidate ordinary people. It had expensive letterhead, complicated legal language, and several paragraphs explaining why I should immediately remove my barriers and allow their construction access to continue. I read it twice, then placed it on my kitchen table next to Daniel's old leather notebook where he used to write down ranch expenses. There was something almost funny about it. A man who had never met Daniel, never walked this land, and never lifted a fence post, here was now telling me what I could and couldn't do with the property my husband built a life on. But I also knew something important. Anger doesn't win legal battles. Preparation does. So I called an attorney I had worked with years earlier, a property rights lawyer named Rebecca Collins. She came out to the ranch 2 days later. I walked her along the expanded road, showed her the damaged fence lines, and explained everything from the beginning. She didn't say much at first. She just listened. Then she looked at the measurements and smiled slightly. "Claire," she said, "they didn't make a small mistake. They created a very expensive problem for themselves." That was the first time in weeks I felt like someone understood what was happening. Rebecca helped me organize everything. We collected the original easement documents. We pulled county records. We reviewed the construction plans. Then we used the drone footage I had taken from above the property. That footage showed everything clearly. The original 12-foot access road, the new 24-foot expansion, the destroyed fence sections, the grading work that had changed the land. There was no argument anymore. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision they made because they assumed nobody would challenge them. Rebecca sent their attorney a response with everything attached. The original easement agreement, the survey, the photos, the drone images. And then came the part that nobody expected. We included a demand for reimbursement equal to the cost of the unauthorized construction, $156,000, the exact amount they spent building something they never had permission to create. Rebecca also copied the county officials and the state transportation office because this wasn't just a disagreement between neighbors anymore. It was a question of whether someone could use money and influence to rewrite property rights. Within days, the story started spreading. A local reporter called me after hearing about the dispute. At first, I didn't want attention. I wasn't trying to become some kind of local celebrity. I just wanted my land left alone. But the reporter asked me one question that stuck with me. "Claire, why do you think they assumed they could do this?" I thought about it for a second. Then I said, "Because they looked at me and saw a widow. They didn't see a property owner." That quote ended up becoming the headline of the article. The story ran with the title, "Luxury Developer Expands Private Access Road Without Permission. Ranch Owner Fights Back." After that, everything changed. People in Willow Creek Estates started asking questions. Homeowners who had paid thousands in HOA fees wanted to know why their money was being used to support Blake's private development project. Some residents said they had never approved the road expansion. Others claimed Evelyn had presented it as a necessary community improvement without explaining the details. The HOA meetings became heated. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't standing at the front of the room controlling the conversation. She was answering questions, and people don't like being told they were manipulated. Within a month, 2 board members resigned. Another one publicly stated that the HOA needed an independent review of its decisions. Blake Hart, who had once acted like the entire situation was a minor inconvenience, suddenly stopped returning calls. But I knew the fight wasn't over. People like Evelyn rarely admit defeat quietly. A few weeks later, she showed up at my gate again. But this time, she didn't bring police. She didn't bring an attorney. She came alone. I almost didn't recognize her. The confidence was gone. She stood there looking at the expanded road behind her and said, "Claire, we need to talk." I crossed my arms and waited. She explained that Blake's construction trucks were struggling without the wider road. Delivery vehicles needed the extra space. The luxury homes were behind schedule. The project was losing money. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. "We are willing to offer you $5,000 to resolve this." $5,000. After everything. After tearing out my fence. After changing my land without permission. After calling the police on me. She still thought she was negotiating from a position of power. I looked at her and said, "Evelyn, you still don't understand what happened, do you?" She looked confused. I continued, "You didn't ask for permission. You didn't negotiate. You made a decision and expected me to accept it. Now you're not offering me a favor. You're asking me to give you something you already took." For the first time, she had nothing to say, and that's when I made my offer. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to punish anyone. But because if they needed that extra 12 feet so badly, then they needed to understand the value of what they were using. I told her they had two choices. They could remove the unauthorized expansion themselves and restore my property, which would cost them tens of thousands of dollars, or they could lease the additional 12 feet from me legally, $15,000 a month. 10 years, a real agreement, a fair price for the convenience they were desperate to keep. Evelyn looked at me like I had lost my mind. $15,000 a month? She repeated. I nodded. Yes, the same way you valued the road when it benefited you. I'm valuing my land now. She said she needed to discuss it with Blake. I told her that was fine, but there was one more condition. If they missed a payment, even once, the expanded section would be closed immediately. No arguments, no delays. The original 12-foot easement would remain open, but the extra space they created would be gone. Evelyn left without saying goodbye. I watched her drive away and realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. For weeks, I had been fighting because I was hurt, because someone had taken something from me during one of the hardest times of my life. But standing there at that gate, I'd finally understood something. This wasn't about winning against Evian Hart. It was about reminding people that respect cannot be purchased. A week later, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. She had one sentence for me. "Claire, they signed the agreement." When Rebecca told me they signed the agreement, I didn't celebrate the way people probably expected me to. I didn't open a bottle of champagne. I didn't stand in front of the ranch and feel like I had conquered some huge enemy. I just sat at my kitchen table, looked out at the fields Daniel and I had spent decades caring for, and finally allowed myself to breathe. For months, I had been fighting a battle I never wanted. I wasn't trying to become the woman who fought with neighbors, argued with an HOA, or ended up in the middle of a community dispute. I was simply trying to protect the place that held every memory of the life I'd built with my husband. The first payment came exactly 30 days later. $15,000 appeared in my account, and I stared at the number for a while. Not because I needed the money, but because of what it represented. A few months earlier, Evelyn Hart looked at me like I was an obstacle. She saw a widow living on a ranch and assumed I would be easy to pressure. She thought money, lawyers, and influence could make me step aside. But she learned something important. Land isn't valuable because someone powerful wants it. Land is valuable because someone fought to protect it. After the agreement was signed, Blake Hart's construction trucks continued using the road, but everything changed. The workers stopped driving across my property like they owned it. They stopped moving fences and changing things without asking. Every truck that passed through that gate was there because of a contract, not because someone decided my permission didn't matter. And honestly, that difference meant more to me than the money. A few months later, I ran into a Willow Creek resident at a small grocery store in town. She recognized me and walked over with a nervous smile. "You're Claire Bennett, right? The ranch owner?" she asked. I laughed and said, "I guess that's what people call me now." She told me many homeowners had no idea what had really happened. They thought the road expansion was just another neighborhood improvement project. They didn't know their HOA leadership had pushed forward with a plan that directly benefited the developer's family. They didn't know questions had been ignored. They didn't know the person they thought was protecting their community was actually creating a problem for everyone. She apologized to me, but I told her something I truly believed. The problem isn't that people trust their leaders. The problem is when leaders stop respecting the people who trusted them. Because that's how situations like this begin. It rarely starts with someone saying, "I'm going to take advantage of people today." It starts with small decisions, a shortcut here, a favor there, a little assumption that nobody will challenge them. And before long, someone is standing on the other side of a fence, realizing something important has been taken from them. Sometimes the hardest part isn't fighting the person who caused the problem. It's finding the courage to believe your own voice matters. Looking back, I still think about Daniel almost every day. I imagine what he would have said if he had been standing beside me through all of this. Knowing him, he probably would have laughed and said, "You know, most people spend retirement relaxing. Somehow you started a legal battle with a luxury neighborhood." And honestly, he would have been right. That wasn't the future I imagined. I imagined quiet mornings, taking care of the ranch, watching the sunset over the fields. I never imagined reading legal documents late at night or standing at my gate explaining property rights to people who believed they were untouchable. But life has a strange way of showing you who you are when things get difficult. I learned that being alone doesn't mean being powerless. I learned that being calm doesn't mean being weak. And I learned that sometimes the people who underestimate you are the ones who never bothered to understand you. Evelyn Hart never apologized. Maybe she never will. Some people would rather hold on to their pride than admit they were wrong. But every month when that payment arrives, I don't think about revenge. I don't think about beating her. I think about the promise Daniel and I made when we bought that ranch all those years ago, that we would take care of it, protect it, and leave it better than we found it. And that's exactly what I did. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think I handled this the right way? Or should I have found another solution? Have you ever had someone with more money, more power, or a bigger title assume they could simply walk over you? Tell me your story in the comments below. Because sometimes these battles aren't really about fences, roads, or property lines. Sometimes they're about something much deeper. The simple question of whether people still believe respect has to be earned. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who has ever been underestimated. Because sometimes the person standing quietly at the gate isn't the person who is losing. Sometimes they're the person who has been waiting for the right moment to stand up.